It says that we're live. Let's see. Yeah, look at that. It looks like it's working. That's awesome.
Welcome to Talking About Horses, the podcast that brings the timeless art of horsemanship into the modern world. Join your host, Patrick King, as he dives deep into the heart of horse training, riding, and the stories that connect us to these incredible animals. With decades of experience training horses and riders across the globe, Patrick combines his expertise with the wisdom of extraordinary guests. From dressage trainers to trail riders, Olympic competitors to backyard warriors, seasoned cowboys to psychologists, and so many more. Together, they explore the classical principles of horsemanship, equine fitness, rider psychology, and the journey of learning itself. Get ready to hear candid conversations, thought-provoking insights, and a touch of humor. All with one goal in mind, honoring the welfare of the horse and the timeless pursuit of mastery. So saddle up and join us for Talking About Horses, because every great partnership begins with better understanding.
Okay, so hey gang, I want to thank you so much for joining me for a new year, new episode. I think this is something like podcast episode like 58 or something like that of Talking About Horses. It's been requested by so many folks that we get this started again, and I'm really excited to be joined by my good friend Jec Ballou. And Jec has spent her life with horses, studying dressage around the globe, and has a tireless passion for equine exercise physiology. She has written and presented extensively on the subject of equine fitness and conditioning. Jec is a tireless advocate for the horse, committed to promoting the understanding that quality athletic movement can never happen as a result of shortcuts, force, or hurried training methods. Through her clinics, articles, and several books, including 101 Dressage Exercises for the Horse and Rider, which was endorsed by the United States Dressage Federation as critical for every rider to own, 101 Western Dressage Exercises for the Horse and Rider, one of my favorites, Equine Fitness, 55 Corrective Exercises for Horses. I know there's a couple more that I'm missing. And her most recent new book, 33 Strength, I can get it on here in the picture, 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts for Horses. Jec aims to meet what she sees as an enormous need within the equine industry. Simple, straightforward tools to help horses use their body optimally. I hope I did justice to that introduction there, Jec, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. That was pretty glowing. I hope I can live up to this. It's really nice to chat and spend some time with you, Patrick. It's always fun.
It is always fun. It's really, really great to see you. And I'm going to see if I can share this. I mentioned this to you here. I'm going to see if it'll let me show this. But we talk about the books, and these books have been translated into different languages also. Can you see that, Chair?
Oh, it came up. Yes.
Did it come up? Fantastic. I wasn't sure if it was going to come up. So Jec and I were in Portugal in one of my favorite tack shops, and we happened to find her book, Equine Fitness, translated in Portuguese for sale in the tack shop there. So that was a super exciting moment. So just thought I'd share that.
That was wild. I was like, what? That's
right?
my book.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, we were all excited. We're like, yeah, we know her. We know her. I think that was about when the bottle of wine and the chocolates popped out.
Yeah, we had a party.
Exactly. That was so great. So, Jec, I want to respect your time, and I thank you so much for joining me here for this. So, when we talk about fitness, one of the things, and I kind of want to jump right into this, one of the things that you offer is customized fitness plans for horses. Okay. So can you, for a moment, and I'm so excited that you agreed to review a video and talk about how you create a fitness plan for horses, but to start out with, how would you go about that when somebody's wanting to evaluate their horse and come up with a fitness plan? What does that look like? I mean, is that, the whole old school idea of send him to the trainer to get him legged up for 30 days and then he's show ready? Or, what are we actually looking at when we do this?
Well, I think when I started doing these like 5 years ago, I thought it was gonna be what you said, which is like, I'm gonna help people who don't have a trainer come up with a plan. But
Okay.
as it's evolved, it's not that at all. And so where I'm coming from for who listeners who don't know me is I spent a lot of time studying exercise physiology. It's just something I'm deeply interested in from a human standpoint as well as horses. And so I'm not just making this stuff up. So just to get that out there. These aren't just my ideas. But what it's evolved into is people contact me, and a lot of times they're already in a training program, but they have generally very specific, I don't want to call them problems, but things they're trying to resolve with their horse. So it might be that the horse is grossly out of shape, although that's not often the case. It's usually that the horse has some like movement anomaly that they're a little bit stumped by, or in many cases they're just overthinking. I mean, we're humans.
Mm,
That's what we do. We overthink
right.
things, right?
We're great at that.
And I can provide some outside perspective, or sometimes they're doing the right thing, but they're not doing enough of it. Because when it comes to fitness training, as you know, Patrick, like the dosage really matters. And sometimes people think they're doing the wrong thing because they're not seeing any results. Like, let's say they want to
Mhm.
make their horse stronger so that it can do better collection. Like that's just an example. And they'll think, oh, I must be doing something wrong because I'm not seeing results. But in reality, they might have a good batch of exercises they're using. They might just not be doing the right dosage. So maybe not high enough intensity and or duration. And we'll get a little bit more into that. But the way it works is somebody will contact me because they either have one of my books or their trainer told them. A lot of times their trainer will actually tell them to contact me, which is really cool because I love working with in partnership with trainers.
Mhm.
And
That's one of the things
they'll
that I really love
typically,
too about your plans is I've
yeah,
got
go on.
several
I love
friends I know
collaboration.
have reached out to you, and it's like, great, what has Jack said? What are we working on? How do we want to focus on this? And
Mhm.
on the trainer's side, when it comes to like developing lesson programs and things like that, it's super great to have your feedback on that and your insight because it makes it so much easier to structure the lesson for the person and for the
Okay.
horse.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I love that. Um, and what I offer is it's a month long plan, and then people, if they want to do a follow up, they certainly can. But I write out a prescription for what to do every day, how long to do it, how many reps, et cetera, et cetera. And like we can work through this with the horse example that you sent me, but then I generally do ask them to send me a short video as well. And the purpose of the video, like we can get into that a little bit more. I didn't know, are you going to show that video or is this
Yeah,
audio
if I
only that
can
we're
get
doing?
this to work, I will show that
Oh,
whenever you're ready.
technology. There you
Ah,
go. Good.
cross your
I'm
fingers and
glad
hope.
you're running a good show. Great.
Is that something that you're ready to see right off the bat?
Um, Yeah, because that'll start us off nicely. Because the point of me seeing a video, and so if you all at home are kind of thinking about how would I go about designing a fitness plan, what is the purpose of a 30-second video? Obviously, if I don't see the horse in person, I'm not like measuring its heart rate and its cardiac recovery from the video, but I'll just sort of go through the things that I take from the video that you on your own at home can think through because that's the foundation that you would build your plan on. And the reason these came about, to keep in a very roundabout way answering your original question, Patrick, was the way we've always trained horses, like it's not bad, but it's not effective always from a fitness standpoint because for most of my career I've made my living training other people's horses, and you kind of do the thing you're paid to do, which is train the horse every day. Now when I
Mhm.
say train, I mean like you're teaching them a certain set of skills. Like that's why the horse is there. But what happens is, in terms of aerobic output and in terms of just activity repetition, you end up kind of working the horse at the same rate in terms of rate of exertion every single day. They end up doing a lot of the same stuff, a lot of repetition.
Okay.
And the downside is from a physiological standpoint, you stop making gains. The horses are very, very efficient, which it keeps them alive in the wild. But the downside is you don't make fitness gains. And so then you eventually hit a stone wall with your training gains because then they don't have the physical aptitude to do the skills you're asking them to do. So it's kind of the
Gotcha.
circle, you know? So the more we learn about their physiology, the smarter we can be about their training. But it does require some like creativity and thinking outside our old school
Mm,
boxes for those. I know I don't look a day over 20, but I'm kidding, but I have been doing this a while. So it challenges me to think outside the box that
mhm.
I was operating in forever, right?
For sure, for sure. Well, and one of the things, actually, we've got a couple folks messaging here that it's hard to hear my audio. And now that I see on this first time using this
Oh,
platform, um, I'm not sure why, but it won't let me change the audio while it won't let me switch microphones while I'm doing this. So I apologize, gang, and I'll just try to speak up louder and hopefully it helps. Um,
that's weird because I
but
hear you fine. Huh.
you can hear me fine? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, that's good
totally.
to know.
Yeah.
Actually, that's really good to know. So one of the things that I found really challenging was a 30-second video. And you talked about how, we tend to overthink things. And boy, did I do that. I went out to lunge this horse for, a 30-second video, and I came back with about 10 minutes worth of footage, and I thought, how do I make this 30 seconds? And so I tried to pull
Okay.
together the best shots of each gate from both directions, and I'm sure that I overthought that too. Uh, but let me see if I can get that, if this will work to pull this up. I believe you should be able to see this on your side.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. All right. Here we go. See the horse
Perfect.
walking here.
Good. Oh, and I can see on our live screen also that it has pulled it up. So that's perfect.
Okay. Great. So, and maybe what we'll do is, I don't know, we might end up watching it a couple times. So, what I would be looking for if a student had sent me this is a couple, like actually several things that you can tell in a snapshot. Number one is like sort of what's the rapport between this horse and handler. Like I can tell this horse is pretty schooled, it's tuned into you have a good
Mm,
handle on the horse, and as you know, that is not always the case. So that little snapshot right there is really important because it dictates which exercises I'm going to assign somebody, because I don't want to assign exercises that might be good if they require a higher level of skill, because it's just going to be unproductive for horse and handler, right? So one of the things I check
okay.
out is sort of like, what's the dynamic here?
Okay.
Next is,
And I guess I should
um,
say as we go into this that this is a horse that came in to me for training, and he's at this point in this video he's been with me for a couple weeks. So still very fresh and new and that sort of thing. So just putting that out there as we go, because I imagine that that would have some interplay as well with folks potentially, not knowing a horse's potential or capability or issues or things like that.
okay, and he's 8, which
Hmm.
for listeners or viewers is a really, really good age. 8 to 10 is like you can make so many conditioning gains. Their skeleton is mature, so you can work them pretty darn hard. They can
Okay.
still really absorb exercise and not need such a careful recovery as they do after they crest over ages 10 to 12, with the exception of Arabians who like live forever and hit their prime in their 20s. But
Right.
I mean, I'm kidding a little bit, but this is really good age. So I do also notice from the video, okay, this horse is kind of chunky, right? So that tells me
Hmm.
maybe that's his constitution, but that's it's another reason the video is helpful, because then I can check in with the owner and see if they know that or not, because
Okay.
sometimes
Yep.
they don't think the horse is overweight, or they can say, yeah, actually, I that's part of why I contacted you, Jack. I realized my
Mhm.
horse is a little hefty. Okay, so that's something I noticed. The other thing I noticed from the video is, okay, Patrick has a lot of amenities at his disposal. He has this enormous arena, which from
Mhm.
a conditioning standpoint and strengthening standpoint is super important, because you can do a lot of straight lines. Some people have tiny, tiny little facilities, as you know, and
Oh,
it's
sure.
hard to find a straight line that's longer than 10 meters. They have these little
Mhm.
pens and everything's steep and hilly and boggy and marshy and whatever. But I see, okay, and not only do you have this arena, you have all this, I'm seeing land behind you. I'm seeing a hill. I'm
Mhm.
seeing, variety. And so I know that I also ask the person what they have access to. But sometimes if I asked you and you were more of an amateur, you might say, well, I just have this arena, but I don't have a trail. And then I can say, well, what was that like field I saw in your video? You don't have to have a proper trail, but I did see, can you ride in the pasture? That might feel funny to you, but it's really valuable. We can put together some valuable routines.
Gotcha.
Um, so that's a big one. Now, what I don't totally see in this horse, but you can correct, maybe you were correcting it in your 10 minutes of footage, Patrick. What I don't see in this horse, one of the reasons I like to see footage is to see if there's like a major crookedness. Because sometimes people will
Okay.
have a lame horse and they'll contact me as part of a rehab. They want a plan to help recondition the horse,
Mhm.
and the horse is so crooked, and the person may or may not realize that the crookedness is actually either caused by the crookedness or coming from the crookedness. So this is a major issue that we need to address. So I mean, this horse is a little bit asymmetric. How does he feel to
Mhm.
you in the short time you've had him?
So he has some low back stuff, just what feels like tension, particularly in the canter to the right, which is why I skimmed the video ahead here to the right. He does kind of have the typical asymmetry in the canter where the right hind wants to trail a little bit to the inside, and as you go to straighten him, he gets a little tight in the back, like he's thinking about a flying change. Some of that may be some past life experience, but he also kind of typical Iberian horse has a little bit the shoulder paddling or winging that he does there, particularly the right shoulder.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah, and again, it's just for people watching, no like massive leaning in like a motorcycle or twisting to the
Yeah.
outside. That's one of the things I'm looking at is does the what kind of gaits do we have? And I would
Mhm.
say the majority of people, I know it sounds crazy, but when we stop and think about our own horses, just a nice, decent watch ride canter online like this without trying to organize the horse is a little bit of a rarity. So to have three solid gaits to work with, then I
Okay.
can build the training plan around that. Because if the canter is a hot mess, like the horse only cross canters or it's frantic or only has one lead,
Right.
then we have to be a little bit more careful because if it's a frenetic experience, we're not getting like if we're looking for a pure aerobic stimulus, we're not getting that. It starts to skew more towards anaerobic or just
Okay.
plain not helpful. So,
Mhm.
and then just you can play either lead you want, but just let it go one more time because the big takeaway from this video, in addition to all the points I just mentioned, is interestingly, when you watch this horse canter, to me, the canter looks amazingly efficient. Like, I would bet this horse expends very little energy in the canter. Now, this is not often the case. So,
Mhm.
very helpful to see about this horse. It's a very cool aspect to see. But what that tells me in terms of a conditioning plan is a lot of canter exercises are not going to be valuable in terms of building strength. We have to be very
Okay.
strategic with the canter exercises because he is
Mhm.
so efficient at cantering, if that makes sense
Mhm.
for lists. It's kind of like the human parallel of don't just practice the things you're good at if you're trying to improve other areas. So then I would ask you what your goals were. But most people contact me
Mhm.
because they're trying to develop some strength somewhere in their horse. So
Mhm.
cantering, as people have heard me wax on and on and on about, is so beneficial. And I would normally a couple times a week have like a canter workout I would assign you. With this
Okay.
particular horse, I would probably take a different route because his canter is so efficient. You see what I'm saying? So and
Gotcha.
so
Okay.
it's not a tool for us. Like we just kind of took that tool off the table. But what's your experience been like to ride him? Does it feel like it's pretty easy compared to most horses to canter?
It is in stages, and so that's so interesting that you say that. So when I mean, he came with a ton of tension, and so we had to unlock a lot of
Okay.
that. And he is really an interesting fellow because as soon as I said, "Hey, you don't have to be that tense," he said, "Oh, phew, okay, I don't want to ever go back there." and that's
Woo!
when he's like, well, can I just chill out in all my gaits here, so that's when the canter started to get like that. And I like to joke that you could lope him out like a reining horse. Basically, you can ride this horse on the buckle and he'll just go along kind of that long stretchy canter, and he does have that canter that feels like you could just go forever and he wouldn't break a sweat. Now, the challenge for him comes when we pick up contact and we ask him to come into connection. That's specifically when that right hind kind of does its little thing of just,
Okay.
camping to the inside, that sort of thing. But you totally nailed it with when you're riding him, you could canter him all day long and he's happy as a lark. It's definitely his, we talk about horses
Okay.
having a certain resting gait. Canter is certainly his resting gait now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, that's lovely from a writing standpoint.
Hmm.
It would just take, and it would just sort of, like I say, it takes that tool off the table. And similarly, if and when a horse has had, not that that's the case with this horse, but when a horse has had some like bad schooling in a certain way, even if it's an exercise that might be really valuable and I would normally use, let's say, lateral work exercises
Hmm.
can be part of a strength training program. However, if I know or observe that a horse has had some pretty less than desirable dressage training and been drilled ad nauseum with lateral work,
Hmm.
I'll take that tool off the table because it's not going to be productive. So that's where like plans start to get really customized, is horses are all so different. And the other thing that this ties in with this particular horse, with like the perception that he gives me that the canter was really efficient, is he does seem to have a pretty forward going nature. I mean, I don't see you
Hmm.
flogging him forward with the whip or chasing. Like he just kind of goes.
Hmm.
And for some horses, that's not the case. So if people send me a video and the horse is kind of really plodding around and barely moving, that's a big consideration. Like I can't just write up a bunch of exercises that might be good for some horses because they're not going to be valuable for this horse at all. He's just not
Gotcha.
physiologically and mentally participating in the exercises. So I like to see a video like the one you sent me. I said, okay, this horse is a kind of a forward going guy. Like we
Mhm,
can get a lot done. If anything, it's probably managing the tension with this horse.
mhm,
But
mhm,
that's important to see on a video. It's like, what is the general like baseline demeanor, which is why I like to see a video of a horse. It's not like from a show or just kind of in their natural state, like on a
okay,
line or kind of hacking around on a long rein, but not trying to show me like the best work they can do. Cause that gives me a good read on, do you got to like push them forward every stride, or are you having to like hold them back, or like what's their baseline? Because if this
gotcha.
horse was a total hothead or chomping his teeth and really sort of a wound up guy on the lunge line here, that would certainly make me hesitate to assign any like interval style work, because horses like that,
Sure,
generally, the more you like repeat things in quick succession, the more amped they get. Not always, but generally. So that
yeah,
would be a consideration. And again, something that you can tell in a little 30-second clip. So there's a
mhm.
lot you can get in these little snapshots here. But I like this little horse. What are we
That's
gonna do
awesome.
with
So,
him?
one of the questions here, that came in, actually, several people have asked this question leading up to our chat, and I think it's a really fantastic one, is how would we train our eye to see these things, to see like imbalances, like when we talk about the crookedness and things like that? How do you train your eye to see that in your horse? And then another kind of a follow-up question to that is, as a rider, how do people train their body to feel the the imbalances, or what's good and right versus what's a deviation from that?
Well, I think you should create a whole master class on this, Patrick, honestly.
It would be a lot,
I
wouldn't it?
mean,
That's kind of a
yeah,
loaded
there's
question, and
a
yeah,
lot there.
yeah.
But I think in the first part of the question that you asked is like, how do we like observe these imbalances? So
Mhm,
like for me, if you have a horse on a lunge cavesson, like you do with this horse, which is
mhm.
the only way I like horses worked on the ground, or ground driving, but no restrictive aids. The things that you're looking for, and they're quite simple, I think, but like, can you make the same size circle both directions with the same rhythm and the same general outline of the horse? So If
Okay.
you start to notice that every time you circle your horse to the left, his head is in the air like a llama, and it's not that way when you go to the right, like when you go to the right, maybe his head is lower than his withers, then that tells you, oh, hey, things are pretty different here. And always, if your horse doesn't really like one canter lead, there's a pretty notable asymmetry um in their body. And that's not uncommon and it's not a judgment, but like if one side they canter pretty well and the other side like it's a flip of the coin if you're going to get the lead or they rush forward.
Hmm.
And then the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, and not news to you, but like, if you're working them on a circle and they're always like just careening their neck to the outside of the circle or leaning in towards you, that to me is a pretty, I won't say red flag, but it's a data point that they're not able to use their hind end equally, and or I see a lot of problems in the front end. Actually, it might like show up in the back end, but I think the restriction is in the front end. Maybe from bad shoeing or bad riding. You got one really
Okay.
dominant shoulder that's like, landing heavily, and then that
Hmm.
starts to alter their biomechanics. Um, so those are the things I look at. Do you have the same basic speeds in all three gates side to side? Or is your circle the same size? Or you notice you're always having to gather up your lunge line when you go one direction because the horse is like, falling in towards you.
Hugging in on you.
Those
Yeah.
sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Okay.
That's what I look for.
Okay. Great. Great. Yeah. So this guy you had asked, and sorry I interrupted that, but you had asked what the plan was for this fellow, and
Yeah.
primarily, he's going to be used as a dressage and working equitation horse, but also primarily or I should say, generally a confident trail horse. And his owner would like to play quite a bit with the Garocha. So that's
Okay.
super fun. That's one of those things I love to play with, and we've done a little bit of that with him at this point now. But yeah, so more on the dressage and working ec side of things.
Okay. So we can just kind of keep going through the steps. So the reason I asked Patrick that for everybody watching is the intended goal for the horse matters because the way you build the training plan has to take that into account. So
Mhm.
when we say fitness, most people tend to think of like aerobic fitness, which is a type of fitness. But like the activities that you just mentioned, some nice casual trail rides, some dressage based work is a very low aerobic activity. So that tells me, okay, we don't need to get this horse's cardiorespiratory system fired up like we do on an endurance horse, a race horse, polo cross horses. Those are
Okay.
totally different pursuits, right? So
Yeah.
it wouldn't make sense to assign you like, 6-mile tempo rides and this sort of thing. I mean, for fun, sure, but that's not going to build the type of fitness you want. So we take into account what are we trying to do. So for those kinds of activities, dressage work, garocha work, the horse needs to have good coordination, balance, and strength.
Hmm.
Those are the big ones.
Hmm.
And so then I would ask, as we start to build out the plan, I would start to, and I'm guessing if this horse is in training with you, he's ridden or exercised like really frequently. But then I would ask how many, because it has to be realistic. This is the thing. It's like people will
Oh,
contact me
sure.
for a
Right.
training plan. They want to do the best. It's like New Year's Day. Everybody's got a resolution for themselves. They're going to train for that marathon. They always, but be realistic. If you don't want to run a marathon, you don't have to. Or if it doesn't
Hmm.
fit in your schedule, don't stress yourself out. So, busy working folks, if they tell me, look, I want to work my horse 6 days a week, but it is not going to happen, Jack. It's not going to happen. I don't board him at my house. I got to drive there. I got 4 days a week. That's all I got. The reason that matters is, again, we have to be realistic. We can't do these hero workouts that the horse cannot absorb because it doesn't have the right supporting stimulus on either ends of the week. All you do then is just break the horse down and create soreness.
Sure. Well, just the
So
same
I
as
would,
we would do with ourselves, right? If you go to the
yeah,
gym on rare
yeah,
occasions and basically kill yourself in the workout.
right. You can put it on Instagram and it looks cool.
Yes.
Like watching
Exactly.
it any game. So how often do you work this guy here?
So he works 5 to 6 days a week.
Okay. That's great. That's really great. So the dials that we have to turn, the knobs that we have to turn in a fitness plan are intensity, duration, and frequency. So to be honest, and nobody watching, you're not allowed to beat yourself up if you can't cross this threshold, okay? But to be honest, we can't really talk about increasing duration or intensity, which is where you start to really build fitness, until you've got frequency. Overall
Sure.
weekly volume is where we start. And it is the least likelihood of injury. If you can just increase the volume of your horse's low, mellow, chill, aerobic activity on a weekly basis, that's where you need to start. You do need to be exercising your horses 4, 5, 6 days a week, ideally. That frequency matters. Okay. That doesn't mean you can't get good skill training done in like 2, 3, 1 day a week. You definitely can. You can
Okay.
get on and teach a horse some footwork, or, teach
Mhm.
them a trick or a skill. Absolutely. But if we're talking about improving their physiology, it doesn't happen in fewer than 4 sessions a week. Some people, I'm going to go down a brief tangent here, but some old school thoughts will say that like these 100-mile endurance horses can hold their fitness with 3 days a week. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is the physiology studies all agree that you need 4 or more days a week of stimulus. Stimulus is low aerobic activity of 25 or more minutes a day.
Okay.
Now, it might be the case that these seasoned endurance horses can maintain fitness, although the thinking is shifting a little bit. But this was before we could measure all the plasma volume and all the good stuff that we can the data we can collect nowadays.
Okay.
But I will also point out that most of these folks are making these impressions on Arabians, and they are physiologically gifted when it comes
Yes.
to riding endurance.
Mhm.
So the fact that they can go out and run pretty quick with just 3 days a week of training for a lot of these folks, I wouldn't use that as a benchmark for, the average folks working their horse. So
Got
to go back to our three dials that we can turn, you've
it.
got
Mhm.
your frequency, which is the first dial you turn up. It's the first one. And
Okay.
then you have your duration of your sessions, and then you have intensity. And we only start adding intensity in cases where you've got a good solid foundation of frequency, like you're developing with this horse. So I would be comfortable if you've had this horse for a month or two and you
Mhm.
have been riding it for 5 days a week. You've got the frequency down. And then I would ask, okay, what is the architecture of its week? Because the first thing hurdle you want to clear is that you're, getting your horse out more days a week if you're only typically able to get it out 2 to 3, right? The first thing you
Mhm.
want to do is just add a couple days a week. And don't make it more see how I didn't overthink that? Don't make it more complicated than that. Okay?
Right? It's so
So then
simple.
when you do that, then I would say, so tell me a little bit about the week. You're getting the horse out 5 days a week. Like, what does that look like? What are we doing?
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So then for him, I try to vary his work schedule a little bit each day. I try to, in a sense, kind of theme the work schedule. So one day I tend to do a little bit more obstacle focused because we're working with the idea of the working equitation. So we play a little
Mhm.
bit with the garrocha, we have barrels and tarps, and, we work on different crossing obstacles and circling obstacles, things like that. And on that day, I also tend to have that be our circles and serpentines day, where we do a
Okay.
lot on circles and serpentines, very few just straight lines. So that's typically one day a week. I have another day that I kind of refer to it as the long run day, where I kind of the old slogan from the Ronco rotisserie. If you remember that infomercial from years ago, he would say,
Oh,
"Set it and forget it." Right? So
Yes,
I'll have
yes.
a kind of a stretching walk, and I'll say, okay, now we're going to free walk, and we'll go 4 laps both directions, free walk. And then we go into a working trot, and we're just straight on the track at that working trot. And I do that 3 to 4 laps each direction. And I mix it up, obviously. And then we do 3 to 4 laps at a canter in just a working canter frame. And that's, I think of it a little bit, I guess, as kind of that cardio day that we talk about, where we just go. I refer to that as his
Mhm.
long run day. And that may not be an appropriate term for that, but that's just kind of how I think of that. Um, and then I have one day with him that's more lateral work than other days,
Okay.
where we focus on our figures, we focus on our leg yields, shoulder ins, haunches ins, half passes at all of our gaits. So I bring the lateral work into that for what he feels like he can. And he struggles a little bit, again, with the strength of the right hind leg in the canter half passes and things like that. But I still play with that. And I'll intermix a lot of these things into each session, right? But there's certain days that I have as a primary focus like that. And
Mhm.
recently, because of some emotional stuff that he's got, we have I refer to it as the walk and pee off day, where that's the primary focus. Is we're working on building his confidence in his piaffe and really getting a softness and a straight body engagement, and then just finding a good working walk from that. So that's, for the most part, that's the schedule as it goes. Right now we're under snow and ice, but when we aren't, I do typically have one day a week that everybody that I ride goes out on the hills. We are really blessed to have a lot of hills and lots of paddocks with lanes between the paddocks, and 100 acres or so of woods to trail ride in. So I like to do that a lot. And on days when the weather's really nice, I'll even ride the paddocks as a warm up before I even go into the arena, or as a cool down after I leave the
Okay.
arena. So we do a lot of hill sets and things like that.
Oh, great. Okay, great. And so, what I hear in there that I'll point out for people is once you've tried to just turn up the overall weekly volume of activity, this horse has a decent amount of frequency. We're hitting that, we're checking that box. Within that, you want to make sure, and again, this is before we start adding, specialized workouts or intensity. Within that frequency of activity, you want to vary a little bit what you're doing each day. So if you're like, oh, Jec said more activities better than not, I'm going to get my horse out 5 days a week, and you do more or less the same effort and time each day. You might not do the exact same batch of activities, but let's say you typically
Mhm.
ride for 45 minutes at about the same rate of exertion, whether you're doing sitting trot on 20-meter circles or you're trotting around the
Mm,
field or whatever. If it's kind of in the same ballpark of effort for the horse,
mhm.
you just get diminishing returns because horses are so.
Sure.
You either get diminishing returns and or the body stops, absorbing good. Good stress is good stress, right? We don't bad
Mhm.
stress is bad stress, but to make gains, we do need to stress the body a little bit. So within your 5 days, and as you described it, it sort of naturally sounds like it's happening, but you do want to have some days that are a bit harder or longer. So you have what's it, the long run Wednesday.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
normally, if you normally ride this horse for like 40, 45 minutes a day, you do want one session that's at least 60, 70, 80 minutes long. That's what I
Okay,
would recommend. And again, so we're just increasing volume. We're still just increasing volume, but you
gotcha.
want to have variety in the duration of your sessions. That's where you start to turn that knob, duration. So you've got
Okay.
frequency of activity over the course of the week. And then you start to make some sessions intentionally shorter and some longer. Um, and again, it doesn't totally matter how those line up because we're not talking about doing anaerobic workouts at this point. So it's not like you need to
Mhm,
have like a big recovery day following your
mhm.
harder, shorter day. But just
Okay.
that variety really matters. And I think one of the most valuable things I sometimes do for people in these conditioning plans is kind of just change the architecture of their week. When they tell me what they're
Mm,
doing, it's so much sameness, and they've hit a plateau because the horse might have like a slippery stifle or a whatever. and they're
Uh-huh.
just doing so much sameness. It's not that any of it's bad. It's that they do need to push a little harder on some days and maybe go like super easy, do active rest, take your horse for a walk in the hills one day. You know what I mean? And a lot
Gotcha.
of times just changing the architecture of the week yields surprising results.
And
And
that's
we are
just for
not
that because
the
the horses will have a tendency to just adapt in their body to the work. Is that what you're meaning? And
they
so then
get
they
super
plateau.
efficient. And from a movement standpoint, the central pattern generators, which I'm psyched people are starting to talk about more, but they're responsible for generating the gait, the gait patterns, which
Okay.
is a cool factor. We have that a little bit too. I think horses more so, but so like once the horse learns the mechanics of trotting, the central pattern generators take it over. So you don't have any brain involvement and you
Ah,
have
okay.
a less full participation of the nervous system, which from the standpoint of them being able to maintain it longer is
Mhm.
good. The downside is, okay, you're recruiting fewer muscle fibers at
Mm,
potentially less rate of force. So in terms of strength building, you're just not nothing's happening. If anything, there's like a
okay.
detraining effect that does happen over time. And you can measure that from horses that have just done the same thing over and over and over. And then a lot of
Gotcha.
times too, horses, again, they could have a really balanced rider. We were talking about rider balance a second ago. They could have a really well-fitting saddle and a balanced rider and all the good things. But if they do the same activities for enough time, if they're unless they're super genetically gifted, they start to have proprioceptive deficits. And you have to really actively work.
Oh,
Like you were mentioning, sometimes you warm up by wandering around the paddocks. I love hearing that because it seems like a simple 10-12 minutes spent, but if unless a horse has the luxury of living in a pasture, a lot of
mhm.
horses don't get that stimulus. And
Right.
it's not just different stimulus through their feet. I mean, it is, but it's different ground reaction forces, which it affects their spine,
Sure.
and their whole gait pattern. It's different loading of the muscles and circulation in the body. So it's so important for keeping their proprioception high. And
Mm,
that's part of just changing the architecture of the week is if you can break up the duration of your sessions, make them variable, and then ideally change, vary the activities. Not wildly, but a little bit. And a lot of times it can happen in the warm up or cool down, as you
okay.
noted.
Mhm.
And then for people who are already doing all of that, then we talk about adding intensity, which would be structured workouts, either weekly or every 10 days. And that's a lot of what's in my new book, the 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts. And you only, if you're following this conversation, you only would do that if you've already checked the box for frequency and duration of sessions, then you've got a really solid foundation. That's when you start adding intensity. And horses do need to work hard. So to go back to the example of this horse that you sent me, that's one of the things that we would do is just start to really add probably once a week since you get them out so consistently and you can fit that in. Again, people that only ride 4 days a week, it's harder to get in all the things, right? You're training for your
Sure.
discipline, your lesson, if you're taking a lesson, and then the weekly workout. And then you have to have an easy session after the workout so the horse can absorb that stimulus rather than just get broke down from it. So the point of, and I know I already said that this horse, his intended, uh, the goals are to do really relatively low aerobic activities, and that's not like a jab. It's like when we
Sure.
measure heart rate data from horses, even competing at Grand Prix, and that's taking into account all the stress, which will jack up their heart rates as well.
Mm,
They almost never get over 120 beats a minute, and that's really relatively low. That's quite low, actually. So most of
yeah.
dressage horses schooling is like in a really low. I mean, it would be the human equivalent of maybe like a brisk walk sort of heart rate. Like it's a low heart rate.
Mhm.
It's a strength sport predominantly. I mean, there's moments of a little bit higher, but for muscle power, power generation, and because there's a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers in a lot of the hindquarter muscles, they're not entirely comprised of fast twitch muscles, but and every breed's a little bit different, but they do have some composition of fast twitch fibers. So even if you're not going to go run barrels, which you need a lot of fast twitch fibers for, but even if that's not your
Mhm.
goal, to develop the strength in these hindquarter muscles that need to do collection for dressage or working equitation, we have to access those muscles with activities that speak to them. The other
Gotcha.
interesting thing, small rabbit hole, that I'm down these days is the deep digital flexor is also really embedded with fast twitch fibers. And I'm like, you
Mm.
see so many lower limb injuries in dressage horses. So many, right? I like,
Yeah.
do you? I do. So
Yeah.
many suspensories and hoof issues. And I just wonder if people would drink my Kool-Aid a little bit more and
Right.
inject some higher intensity efforts into these dressage, the ones who only see the four walls of their indoor arena.
Well, and that's where my mind was just going, right? Because there's a lot higher, at least in the circles that I've been part of, there's a lot higher ratio of those horses not being on, big hills and paddocks and,
Mm.
out in
Yeah.
the pasture running around kind of being horses. Uh, And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess if you think about it overall, all of the disciplines that I know of, the more tendency they have to be restricted in that way and just have their work focused on what they do, right? Their end goal, their end kind of career
Mhm.
tasks, the more you do tend to see those sort of specialized injuries like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the workouts that we would prescribe to this 8-year-old Lusitano would be like higher intensity workouts than he
Okay.
would typically do in his disciplines. But again, the higher the intensity of the workout, the shorter it is. And I spell all that out in the
Mhm.
new book. But
Mhm.
they're surprisingly short for some people. The actual amount of work that you do in these workouts is usually like 12-ish minutes. Obviously, you warm up first and you cool down after. So the whole thing's 30 to 40 minutes. But that is all the stimulus, if you do it the way I've written out the workouts, that these
Mhm.
horses need to make the strength gains that increases the power of the muscle, but also the delivery of blood and oxygen to those muscles. The working force that those muscles can generate comes from that higher intensity schooling. They don't need a lot of it. Again, horses are amazing athletes. They're amazing. They don't need
Mhm.
to do this every day, but they need, every 7 to 10 days. That's where you're going to start to make gains after you've already satisfied frequency and duration. So most of us, we're dictated by the seasons. Right? You got snow right now, which
Sure.
sounds awful, but I don't have any snow, but I live at the ocean. But um you might find yourself like right now, sometimes we get rain in California, not as often as we need, but
Mhm.
and then I have mud, and you can't be doing high intensity workouts then. So I just continue to
Mhm.
check the boxes of how frequently can I offer low aerobic stimulus to the horse, because that's always where you come back to. That's your default. And
Okay.
you might be able to get your horse out 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But that's great, That's great. Frequency is where you start.
Yeah.
Then you
Yeah.
start to increase duration, right? And then you make
Okay.
sure there's some variation in that duration, as we talked about, so you're not doing everything the same. And then during your prime riding season, maybe that's April to October where you live, and you have a consistency going, then you can start to play with some of this intensity based on the goals that you want to make for your horse. Because it has to be appropriate. And again, it has to work and be realistic. And don't beat yourself up if you're just like, I don't have the time, or I can't make that architecture work. But
Right. Right.
a lot of times, though, when you think through it and you realize, oh, don't overthink it, then you realize, oh yeah, okay, this is how I build out the plan. Yeah.
That's perfect, and that's so interesting when you talk about, like, the duration, right? And it is a lot of people will beat themselves up because I don't have an hour, 2 hours to work my horse,
Yeah.
but what you just said about,
Mm.
with Honor, that's the name of this Lusitano, um, about his sessions, starting to build in strength sessions with, like, those 12-minute sets.
Mhm.
And you described a 30-minute session. It's like, gosh, I mean, he might think that that's great that we've got a 30-minute session in there, because they
Yeah.
are typically longer than that just as a base. And I know a lot of people will have that. I mean, I don't mind, when it comes to the mental side of things, also, having several very short sessions with horses in training and that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
it is very much a common idea for folks that, oh, if I'm going to be working my horse, I've got to spend an hour with him, right? To the point where even, like our standard lessons, when we take lessons, it's 45 minutes or it's an hour,
Mhm.
lesson session. And I think that people tend to think that that's what the horse needs in there. And then just what you said, there's that guilty feeling, which is apropos for, early 2025 right now. We're still in January. People get that guilty feeling of here's that goal and I just don't have the time to do all the things that I need to do or whatever, And so then that's really discouraging, and it kind of chases people away from the consistency that they can bring to the
Yeah,
table.
totally.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely right. I've seen people make incredible gains by just really embracing the frequency piece, because if your horse lives in your backyard and you work and it's really dark in the morning when you leave for work, and but you're probably going to lead your horse from the barn to the turnout. And I've seen people embrace this 10 minutes that they have leading the horse
Mhm,
out in the pitch dark, freezing cold in the
mhm.
morning. And then in the evening, they bring him back in and they walk him over logs and they do serpentines and they do it adds up to 20 minutes in the
Yeah.
day, right? But it was divided into 10. But fitness is cumulative. And I think people don't realize that. Like,
Mhm.
the changes in the aerobic enzymes that happen, the muscle cell activation, like those are cumulative gains. So you're just like making those little deposits. And that is the really unmagical reality of fitness. It's not these hero sessions like you're talking about. I'm gonna get my horse out for an hour and do all this stuff. Well, it doesn't really matter if he stands around the other four days a week, and
Sure.
I hate to say it, and don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just, that's how their
It's
physiology
just the
works.
reality of how their body works. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Somebody asked a question on here. Connie asked, would walking through a knee-deep rocky creek count as a good workout?
Wow, Rocky. Woo, I don't know if you got a sure-footed horse.
Right? Right? I think the knee-deep creek by itself sounds like a pretty good workout, huh? Similar to, like, the water
Yeah, totally.
treadmills that we have for them, and
It can be. There are some things that probably used to naturally happen with horses that are incredible exercise that we don't like. They're not part of our normal repertoire, so we don't think about them. Like walking through creeks, like, yeah,
Mhm.
that's resistance training. I mean, unless your horse
Mhm.
is totally freaked out by it, but yeah, that is resistance training and super strength building. Absolutely. Another one is just like dragging stuff. I mean, I grew up in a carriage driving family, so
Yeah,
so we made them. Everybody had to pull stuff, right?
right.
But like, if you can train your young horses to pull a tire in the sand or something like that,
Okay.
amazing, amazing strength building for especially for the top line. But these are kinds of exercises. I mean, you don't see them a lot on social media or whatever, so people don't
Mhm.
think about them. But back in the day, farm work, like horses were doing this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that you actually take me in my memory back to when I used to live by Lake Erie, and we had a really good snowstorm that even the tractor couldn't get out, and so to take hay to the horses, I had a barn full of young horses, and they all learned how to drag a hay sled. It was an
Yeah.
actual sled, and there were plenty of times where it would go between their legs, and it would get kind of western for a minute, but by the by the end of that snowstorm, they all had a good sense of humor and everybody was fed. So, but yeah, doing things like that, you're right. We don't think of it frequently enough, you know.
Yeah.
And it's good for, I think it's good for the rider too, right? A little bit that creativity that brings a little freshness to us. One of the things talking about that idea of the Rocky Creek, you mentioned the proprioception. Uh,
Mm,
how
mhm.
beneficial would that be, riding in that creek in the rocks for their proprioception?
I mean, assuming this horse doesn't do that all the time, it would be valuable. It might be part of their like they might be standing on suboptimal footing all day long. So it might be
Gotcha.
nothing new to them.
Okay.
Um, which is still great. I mean, I think any stimulus on the hoof is wonderful, even if they do live on it. It can
Yeah.
be great,
Okay.
but certainly horses that have never been on, pea gravel or smooth pebbles, like it can be pretty interesting. I've had some horses that obviously stumbling is a very individual thing, but I have had some horses that are so dull in their bodies, they get heavy on the front end, they start to develop like a tripping stumbling problem. And then I start just working them on different surfaces, even just like turning them
Mm,
out on this pea gravel I have and walking them across. We don't have a rocky stream, but we have a little rocky ditch, and that kind of thing. And sometimes their stumbling like goes away because horses are so amazing. Their nervous system
mhm,
is incredible at adapting. And just that novel stimulus sometimes is helpful enough to wake things back up when if the reason for their stumbling and bumbling is a result of them just being real. I mean, talk about not having a full involvement of the nervous system. I think those would be perfect examples.
mhm.
These kinds of horses are just so dull about everything. But so that's just one example of the rocky kind of footing or
Yeah,
suboptimal
anything
footing.
novel, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
that bucket, anything novel, as long as it's safe. And so that's another question that came in. Callie asked the question. I'm going to see if I can pop this up here. But Callie asked the question: what are some ways to keep low-level lesson horses from developing proprioception deficits?
Um, this is a really good one
Might be a whole
because maybe
broadcast
you have
in itself.
super highly skilled riders, but I think a lot of these lesson horses, the biggest thing is their mouths from bouncy hands, right? And then they start to have proprioceptive deficits from just deadening the mouth, the lower neck, the abs, the whole thing.
Mhm,
In my view, and again, most lesson horses do meet like the frequency requirements we were talking about earlier. Assuming that's the case here, a lot of horses in a lesson program or some horses in a therapeutic riding setting, I've helped people uh, having some of these hard workouts, like are in my new book, is a wonderful way to wake up the nervous system. So some of these gallop
mhm.
sets, and again, you don't
Okay.
need access to a track or anything. They're 1 minute long. The ones in my book. They're tried. I tried to
Mhm,
write workouts like most people would have access to and not need special facilities. That comes to mind, or some of the more aggressive hill routines because some of the ones in the book are walk based, but some of
mhm,
them do involve like trot work up and around and down the hills. I would do some of the trot or canter on the hills, but the lesson horses in my world, because of that deadening, proprioceptive deficits they get, the way to like switch everything back on is through some of these hard workouts, obviously with a skilled rider on board, hopefully.
mhm. Right, right, right. That's cool. That's awesome. Great. Let's see. So, and I want to be respectful of your time here. I want to pull up, if I can, that video again and just pick your
Okay.
brain on what would you call then a few exercises that you would have me focus on with this fella.
Okay, so I wrote them down.
Oh, you did. Oh, awesome. Good. Good.
Um, so two things came to mind. So if Patrick were not a friend of mine and he were some stranger who contacted me, and I would point out that his horse was a little bit overweight. The way typically to address that would be, again, when it works, would be to add a double, again, increasing frequency. So to add a
Mm,
second session at least 3 or 4 days a week where it's just walking, you're just hacking around for 20, 25 minutes. But that second session of very low aerobic activity is a good way to shed weight, especially for horses with equine metabolic syndrome. So that'd be one of the things I would recommend is if you have time to do a double session. It can be ponying the horse, riding the horse, ground driving the horse. It's just that you're not working on skill. You are moving the horse.
okay.
But then specific workouts I think would benefit this horse, but you can practice them. Check in with me and let me know if they were useful or not. Would be, and these are all from the new book, the 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts for Horses.
Perfect.
Exercise, or sorry, workout number 20, which is called agile athlete. I love this exercise.
Ah,
So
okay.
it involves going back and forth between trot and canter. So again, we're not letting this particular horse just settle into that canter where he can sort of
Mhm.
idle and he's too efficient. So this exercise keeps switching the stimulus, and you're doing ground pulls at the same time. So you're rolling up to a
Perfect.
canter, coming back to a trot, over the poles, roll up to a canter. You do a you do a set number of reps, and then your rest from the cavaletti is to pick up a canter around the edge of the arena.
Okay.
So it's not a full like hit the brakes, hang out kind of a rest. So that this workout I think would be great for him as written. I wouldn't modify it. I would just do it as it's written in the book. The other
Okay.
one I have written down is workout number 18, which I called terrific trot poles.
Mm.
I think trot cavaletti will be great for this horse. And again, it's a matter of dosage and finding the right number of reps that you do want to take a horse to the point where they're challenged a little bit. I don't think there's value in working horses to the point of fatigue in a
Mm.
dressage setting. Because then when the muscles fatigue, the work goes down into the ligaments, which is problematic. Um,
Mhm.
but I think the way it's written in the terrific trot polls, I think you do 8 reps of the pattern. And then again, you go and you change up the stimulus and you come back and you do 8 reps the other direction.
Okay.
Would be great for him. They are
Perfect.
raised poles. And
Okay.
then the last one I had written down was, again, this would be depending on your snow, but workout. Can't read my handwriting. I think it's number 28, power hills. So this
Okay.
would be cantering up hills. And I do a lot of work on hills with just walk and things like that. But
Mhm.
sometimes, especially in a case like this, and this is because, like we've mentioned, this horse is pretty efficient at the canter, which doesn't mean we have to take that tool off the table completely. We need to be strategic how we use it. So we would add an
Perfect.
incline. It does not need to be steep. But the way it's written in the book is you canter up the hill for a minute. Now, I know just sitting here, a minute doesn't sound like that long, but a minute long hill is actually a long hill. So you may not have a hill that long, but try to get at least 40 seconds. You want to get 40 to 45 seconds, ideally,
Okay.
up. And then you turn around and you jog back down, assuming the footing is stable. If you have to walk, that's okay. But you're
Okay.
trying to do it as written. But that's a workout I would try with him in the canter. I think
Great.
changing the incline is going to be more beneficial than trying to build hindquarter strength on flat, perfectly manicured footing for now with
Mhm.
him. So those are the
Perfect.
workouts I would choose. Now, just to remind people, you would only do one of these each 7 to 10 days. So as Patrick's looking out over his next month, he would do these three exercises sorry, these three workouts over the next month, or he might do one every one. I tend to work out on Wednesdays, tends to be my day, so I would do
Okay.
if the weather, you got to work with the weather a little bit this time of year, but you would do one
Right.
of these on a Wednesday, one of these on a Wednesday. Now, if you do one of the exercises, let's say you try the agile athlete workout, and sometimes I'll do this in a custom fitness plan if I get a sense from the person's background that it would be beneficial, is we'll bring the number of reps down a little bit for the first week. So you're still getting a good workout for the horse, but there also is a little bit of an adjustment period. And then a week later, they would do the exact same workout, but we bump up the number of reps by just a couple, 2 or 3.
Okay.
Then we're done with that workout. You move on to the next workout. Because again,
Mm.
there's not a lot of value in just doing the same
Right.
thing
Don't get
week after
stagnant
week
in it.
after. So yeah,
Yeah.
when we start to get into the intensity, which is what we're talking about here, that's the third knob. We need to make sure that that's the stimulus that we are actually delivering, and
Mhm.
then we might have to bump up the number of reps, raise poles when that's a factor, find steeper, longer hills when that's a factor, increase speed. We start working with our variables a little bit. That's where it gets fun. I think that's where it's fun.
That's awesome. And speaking of the variables and speaking of the polls, how many polls would you recommend on something like that?
I mean, it's helpful to have 8. I realize that
Okay.
for some people, that's a big old pain in the butt. 4 is my minimum, like to be able to set up some
Okay.
patterns where you could actually do something. Like 4 is the bare minimum where you can actually do some stuff.
Okay.
8's a really great number though. There's just a good variety of patterns that you can set up.
hmm
Um,
hmm Well, and
yeah.
that's what, 4 good full strides,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
If you've got
mhm.
8 poles set up, essentially, right? At the for
Yeah.
trot poles, anyway. Yeah. Um, And then, so Cheryl asked the question about that, and when bringing a horse back into work. So, would you, if you were just bringing a horse back into work, and actually a question from Connie talking about an elderly equine, if you're doing that and you're bringing poles in, would you start with less than 4, or would you start at 4?
I would start at 4, and I always start with them on the ground. A lot of value from
Mhm.
not raising the poles,
Okay.
especially for horses that have been out of work and or senior horses. So, um, always try it out though. Check it out. Your horse might surprise you, and you do poles on the ground for a week and it's going swimmingly, then you could raise them up and or add more poles. But again, if you know yourself and like you have a bad back or you are at a barn where they don't like when you set up poles, and sometimes
Mhm.
that's the case, um, just stick with 4 and that can work. The consistency is what matters with ground poles. It's better to stick with 4 poles and do a session each week than um, only set up your 8 poles once every 2 months because they're a pain in the butt for you to set up. You know what I'm saying? So
Gotcha.
whatever
Yep.
you're going to be more consistent with yourself.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's perfect. And then another part of Connie's question, she's the one that mentioned the elderly equine. She says, "I have a 29-year-old mare. She's healthy. I'm always worried about doing too much. What would I look for to keep it good for her?"
Again, I don't know if we're riding this horse or not. I will tell you, Connie, I don't know if it's the fountain of life here in Larkin Valley, but I have 2 horses on my property over the age of 30. They both ride 4 days a week. It's looks different than it did. We've scaled back the mileage. They're trail riding horses, but they still go out 3 or 4 miles, 4 days a week.
That's cool.
Um, but this is a question I get from a lot of folks with senior horses. Things you're looking for. I think horses are pretty good at telling us, but you can keep watch of the heart rate and the respiratory rate and the sweating response. So those are generally our stress indicators. So if you're riding this horse, I'm unclear, but or even if you're just hiking with it out in the hills, um, and there's like a profuse amount of sweating, and you're just walking, that's something to take note of and check in with your
Mhm.
vet. I have a heart rate monitor because I think they're really handy and they're not expensive. And when folks with senior horses do start to wonder, like, is it too taxing for them? We'll put the heart monitor on. And if you're doing your normal activities that you were doing with this horse 5 years ago and the heart rate is within a normal range, you're fine. Plenty of senior horses can keep on going. They'll tell you if they're like, "Hey, I can't do collected canter anymore." They're good at telling us they don't like that's not working, right? Nope,
Mhm.
can't
Sure.
get down this super steep hill anymore. Like they're really good at telling us that. But that doesn't mean stop doing everything with them. I work with a lot of senior horses. They always surprise horses surprise me sometimes. Like, don't treat them like they're old just because they're old.
Right.
But those are the main things to look for is like stress responses, so high heart rate or panting heavily,
And how do you use the heart rate monitor
sweating.
on the horses?
So they have really great ones right now that are wireless. Thank God. Been waiting forever for wireless heart rate monitors. They just go on your girth. They go on the horse's girth,
Okay.
and it reads out on your phone, or it will pair with your watch. And you can get decent ones from Polar for about $100.
Okay.
I work with a company, GW Equine, in Great Britain. They keep telling me they're going to start shipping them to the US. They're great. They pair with an app. But anyway, the point is you can find them and they're not hard to track down. You can get them on Amazon. Um,
Awesome.
or you can just have your vet come and they can do a cardiac recovery test, which is just involves taking the horse's heart rate before and after a little trotting spell down the driveway to see how things are recovering. It's a way of testing
Okay.
the heart and everything if you're worried. But good
Cool.
question. So it sounds like this mare's got some giddy up left.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And Connie
enjoy,
says
enjoy her.
she is riding her. So that's
Oh,
great.
great. Okay.
That's great. One other question on here that I think is really interesting. How beneficial for fitness is a track system if they have access 24/7?
I mean, I think they're really beneficial. The more movement, the better. More movement is better.
Hmm.
More horses
Movement
need
is
more
life,
movement.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then back to senior horses. If anything, senior horses need more movement than younger horses. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, don't lock them in a box. They need more movement, not necessarily more training or more hard work, but they need more movement. And I think track systems are cool. I think that the low grade movement, because a baseline of fitness, and I don't mean like high level cardio fitness, but just like, wellness, whatever you want to call it. But so many horses' bodily functions are dependent on that, on movement, the
Mhm.
quality of their hoof growth, their digestion, their immunity, the secretion of junk from their lungs. Like their health is dependent on movement, and a lot of domesticated horses just don't move enough. So I'm a fan of track systems.
Cool.
um it, I think they're cool. Yeah, again, if you don't have access to one, don't stress yourself out. But if you have one and you thought about trying it out, I think they're real neat.
Awesome. Good. Great, great, great. All right. Well, Jack, thank you so much. Again, I want to be respectful of your time here. So, want to
Okay.
point everybody to your book, the new book, 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts for Horses. This is great. I'm constantly recommending the, I refer to it as the Old Faithful, the equine fitness book right there. I think it's
Thank you. Thank
such
you.
a like an unassuming cover for a book
I
that
know.
packs such a wallop. Like this is it's one of my favorites. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And all of your books are really great. I love particularly just going to brag about the way that you put it together for a moment here, but I really particularly love the way that you put the illustrations out there. You draw the descriptions of them, you write about it, and then even in your online program, the programs that you have online where you'll show the video of it. What I'm always bragging to people about is you could take any one of those and you'd know what you needed to do. You could just watch the video, or you could just read the instruction, or you could just look at the diagram and you know what you need to do. And so the way that you've set it up, you can catch all of those, right? And so that to me
Mhm.
makes the exercises so much easier to replicate because there's no real question in it. It's so well put together to know what you need to do for your horse. So thank
Mhm.
you for doing that with it in the way that you put them
Oh,
all out there. So
well, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear. And thanks for having me on. And thank you
absolutely.
for all that you do for horses, Patrick.
Oh, thank you. And so for folks to find that book, where are they going to look? I just popped up your website right here.
You can go if you buy it from my website, I will sign it and ship it to you, jecballou.com. You're welcome to buy it from Amazon too, but they will not sign it for you. So you can choose. Either way is fine.
There you go. There you go. Perfect. All right. And we can find you on social media too, right?
Sometimes I'm good about posting there. Oh, God, social media. It's a challenge. But yes, Jec Aristotle Balloons, the Facebook page. I'm most active there. Sometimes I post funny pictures of my horses napping on Instagram, but
Yep, yep.
yeah.
I think those are great. And you've done quite a bit on YouTube as well with the little webinars, right? I shouldn't say
Yeah,
little
I've got
webinars
yeah,
because they're
I've
great.
got little webinars like exercises and how to use ground pulls. And then our colleague, Lynn Acton, and I have posted some full length recordings on some topics. She's really into investigative behavior, and it's been fun. We've recorded a lot of webinars over the past year together, and they're available for free on my YouTube channel, which is just my name. So if you've
Awesome.
got some time, put it on in the background while you're cooking dinner or whatever. It's there for you.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much, Jack. This has been super fun. I look forward to the chance to do this again.
Yeah, I hope to see you in person, Patrick.
There we go, right? It's been too long. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
This has been Talking About Horses. Patrick King has been seeking out the wisdom of the masters for several decades now, all over the world. And the guests on this show are considered among the top teachers, trainers, and thought leaders in the industry, focusing on horse welfare, classical principles, and an honoring of the student's learning process. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Patrick King Horsemanship and Dressage, and both websites at pkhorsemanship.com and academyforclassicalhorsemanship.com. Keep riding, and we'll talk to you soon on Talking About Horses.